For more than 2,000 years, a Roman ship had been lying silently beneath the Mediterranean Sea. No one knew exactly where it was. No one knew what happened to it. And for centuries, its cargo remained hidden beneath the water. Then, just off the coast of Sicily, divers made an extraordinary discovery. They found the remains of an ancient shipwreck sitting roughly 46 meters beneath the surface. But the ship itself was only part of the story. Scattered across the seabed were hundreds of ancient ceramic jars, around 500 amphorae. Some of them had been sitting underwater for more than 2,000 years, and suddenly, archaeologists had something rare, a glimpse into a world that existed long before modern borders, modern ships, and modern trade routes. A world where the Mediterranean was one of the most important highways on Earth. So what was this Roman ship carrying? Where had it come from? Where was it going? And how did it end up at the bottom of the sea? This is the story of the newly discovered Roman shipwreck off Sicily. The discovery was made off the coast of Mazzara del Vaio in western Sicily. The wreck lies roughly 3 miles offshore at a depth of about 46 meters. At that depth, the world above becomes almost completely separated from the world below. Sunlight becomes weaker, visibility can become difficult, and ancient objects can remain hidden beneath layers of sediment and marine life. The discovery came after local fishermen reported archaeological remains in the area. Specialists from Italy's Cultural Heritage Protection System investigated the site with divers and underwater equipment. What they found was extraordinary. An ancient Roman-era vessel was resting on the seabed. The ship is estimated to have been about 21 meters long and around 6 meters wide. But the most remarkable feature was not simply the remains of the vessel. It was the cargo. Hundreds of amphorae were still lying where the ship had gone down. For archaeologists, this is more than an old ship. It is a time capsule. Because every object left behind can provide information about the people who made it, the goods they transported, and the routes they traveled. And this particular ship may have been carrying a very valuable cargo. To understand why archaeologists are so interested in this wreck, we need to understand the strange-looking objects covering the seabed. They are called amphorae. An amphora was an ancient ceramic container, usually with a narrow neck and 2 handles. Different shapes were used for different products and periods. They could be used to transport liquids and other goods across long distances. And on this shipwreck, archaeologists identified around 500 of them. Most of the identified amphorae are believed to belong to a type known as Dressel 1A. These containers were commonly used during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. They are strongly associated with Mediterranean trade during the period when Roman power was expanding. Many were used to transport wine, and that possibility makes the wreck even more interesting. Imagine a merchant vessel leaving a port more than 2,000 years ago. Its hold is packed with ceramic containers. Each one represents a product, a customer, a producer, and a destination. The ship crosses the Mediterranean. But something goes wrong. The vessel never reaches its destination. Instead, the ship and its cargo disappear beneath the sea. And now, thousands of years later, archaeologists are finding the evidence. Today, we think of international trade as something involving enormous cargo ships, ports, highways, airplanes, and digital tracking systems. But the basic idea is much older. For ancient civilizations, the Mediterranean Sea was a giant network of trade routes. Ships moved between coastal settlements carrying food, wine, oil, pottery, metals, and other valuable goods. Sicily occupied an extremely important position within this world. Located in the center of the Mediterranean, the island was connected to major routes linking different regions. That meant ships traveling between parts of Italy, North Africa, the Greek world, and other Mediterranean territories could pass through or near Sicily. The newly discovered wreck is therefore important not only because of its age. Its cargo may help archaeologists understand how goods moved around the Mediterranean during the Roman Republican period. Every amphora can potentially tell part of that story. Its shape can reveal when it was made. Its clay can sometimes reveal where it was produced, and traces inside the vessel can potentially provide clues about what it carried. In other words, these jars are not simply containers. They are archaeological evidence. One of the biggest questions remains unanswered. Who actually owned this vessel? Who built it? And who was paying for the cargo? At the moment, archaeologists are still studying the site. The exact origin of the ship and the precise destination of its cargo have not yet been established. That uncertainty is important. Because when we look at an ancient shipwreck, it can be tempting to create a dramatic story and present it as fact. But archaeology works differently. Researchers have to separate what they know from what they think might have happened. We know the wreck is more than 2,000 years old. We know it was carrying hundreds of amphorae. We know many of those containers belong to the Dressel 1A type. And we know the wreck is located off Sicily. But the complete story of the ship is still waiting to be uncovered. Perhaps future analysis will identify the origin of the clay used to make the amphorae. Perhaps researchers will discover more objects among the wreckage. Perhaps the structure of the ship itself will survive beneath the cargo. Each discovery could change our understanding of the vessel. So how did the ship sink? This is where the mystery begins. The Mediterranean can appear calm from the shore, but for ancient sailors, it could be extremely dangerous. There were no modern weather forecasts, no radar, no GPS, no satellite communications, and no modern rescue services waiting nearby. A wooden merchant vessel, loaded with hundreds of heavy ceramic containers, had to depend on its crew, its design, and the conditions at sea. A storm could create enormous waves. Navigation errors could send a ship toward dangerous waters. Mechanical or structural problems could become catastrophic. And even a relatively small accident could become serious when a ship was carrying a heavy cargo. But at this point, the exact cause of this particular shipwreck has not been confirmed. The evidence is still being studied. And that makes the wreck more intriguing. Because somewhere beneath the Mediterranean is a story that has survived for more than 2,000 years. We simply do not know all of it yet. The discovery also has a human story. Before archaeologists could study the wreck, someone had to notice that something unusual was down there. The site came to the attention of authorities after information from local fishermen. Specialist divers then investigated the area. Imagine descending through the Mediterranean. The surface disappears above you. The light becomes darker. And eventually, on the seabed, something begins to emerge. At first, it may not look like a ship at all. It could simply appear to be debris or rocks. Then the shapes become clearer. Ancient ceramic containers, one after another, hundreds of them. A cargo that had remained underwater for roughly 2,000 years. For the divers involved, it was a remarkable sight. For archaeologists, it was the beginning of a much larger investigation. Because finding a wreck is only the first step. The real challenge is understanding it without destroying the evidence. When people imagine underwater archaeology, they may picture divers recovering treasure from the seabed. But modern archaeology is much more careful than that. The position of every object can matter. Where an amphora is located can tell researchers how the cargo was arranged. Its relationship to other objects can reveal how the ship was loaded. Sediment surrounding an artifact can contain additional clues. And the seabed itself can preserve information about how the wreck settled. That is why archaeologists need to document the site carefully. Photography, mapping, three-dimensional recording, material analysis, and controlled recovery of selected artifacts. The goal is not simply to collect old objects. The goal is to preserve the story they tell. Because once an archaeological site is disturbed without proper documentation, some information can be lost forever. This is especially important for a shipwreck. A ship is not just a collection of objects. It is a scene of an ancient event. The wreck may eventually help researchers understand how commerce worked more than 2,000 years ago. Think about what a merchant ship represented at that time. Someone had produced the goods. Someone had purchased them. Someone had packed them into containers. A crew had loaded the ship. A route had been chosen. Ports had been connected. And money was being made. The Mediterranean economy depended on these networks. Sicily was positioned within those networks. And a single shipwreck can preserve evidence of an entire trading system. The amphorae may provide clues about where the cargo originated. Their contents may reveal what was being transported. Their distribution may tell researchers how the ship was loaded. And if the ship's construction survives, it could provide information about ancient shipbuilding. That is why the discovery is much bigger than a collection of old jars. It is a snapshot of ancient economic life. One of the biggest questions is what the amphorae actually contained. Most of the containers are believed to have been used for transporting wine. But archaeologists cannot simply assume that every amphora contained the same product. Different containers could be used for different goods. Future scientific analysis may provide more precise answers. Researchers can study residues. They can examine ceramic composition. They can compare vessel shapes. And they can investigate where the containers were manufactured. These techniques can turn apparently ordinary pottery into historical evidence. A tiny chemical trace could potentially reveal what was stored inside a container thousands of years ago. And the clay itself can sometimes help researchers identify where that container was produced. If enough evidence is recovered, scientists may eventually reconstruct parts of the ship's commercial journey. That means the real story of the wreck may only be beginning. To understand this discovery, we also need to understand Sicily itself. For centuries, Sicily was one of the Mediterranean's most strategically important islands. Its location made it valuable for agriculture, settlement, military control, and trade. Rome's influence over Sicily grew dramatically after conflicts with Carthage. By the period when this ship was likely operating, the Mediterranean was undergoing enormous political and economic changes. Roman power was expanding. Trade networks were becoming increasingly interconnected, and ships like this one helped move goods between distant communities. The wreck therefore represents a moment in a much larger transformation. It belonged to a Mediterranean world that was becoming increasingly connected. People, products, and ideas were crossing the sea, and sometimes ships carrying those connections never reached their destination. The discovery gives us many answers, but it also creates new questions. Where exactly did the ship begin its journey? Where was it supposed to go? Who owned its cargo? Who produced the amphorae? What exactly were they carrying? Why did the ship sink? And how much of the wooden vessel is still preserved beneath the cargo? Researchers are now working to answer these questions. The site is also being documented and protected as archaeological investigations continue. That means the wreck could become even more important in the future. Because what we know today may only represent the first layer of the story. More detailed research could reveal the vessel's age more precisely. Scientific analysis could identify the origins of the cargo, and further underwater investigation could expose parts of the ship that have remained hidden for more than 2,000 years. There is something fascinating about shipwrecks. They freeze a moment in time. A modern shipwreck can tell us about a disaster that happened decades ago. But an ancient wreck can carry a story across thousands of years. This Roman vessel left behind no written message. There is no surviving voice from its crew, no diary describing its final voyage, no recording of the storm or accident that may have brought it down. Instead, we have objects, ceramic jars, anchors, fragments of a ship, and the position of those objects on the seabed. Piece by piece, archaeologists can reconstruct a story, and that is what makes archaeology so powerful. It allows the silent remains of the past to speak.